Billy Napier to remain Florida's play caller despite offensive woes. Texas A&M thriving after Jimbo Fisher gave up his play calling duties to Bobby Petrino. Should coaches call plays? In general, I think it depends. I think if you're Steve Spurrier, you should call plays. I think if you're Josh Heupel, you should call plays. I think that Jimbo Fisher is not in that category despite a national championship, Caleb. I think you had Jameis Winston. I think Billy Napier is nowhere near that category. So long story short, I think it depends. If I'm Josh Heupel, I think he should call plays. If I'm one of those other dudes, I'm okay with taking the criticism and taking a step back. What say you, Caleb?
Yeah, I was just mentioning before we were able to bring you back on, funny enough, that Rob Sale is technically the offensive coordinator at Florida, but he's not calling the plays, which I never understand the point of having a coordinator. Lane Kiffin did this at Tennessee, right? When he had Jim Chaney as his offensive coordinator, even though he called all the plays and ran the quarterbacks. It didn't make any sense at that time. And
I didn't have a problem so much. I didn't have a problem so much as him calling plays. I just think that there needs to be a clear understanding of what is going to get called. And my issue is going to be more along the lines, Caleb, of is there a clear game plan? Did I break up anywhere at that point? Sorry.
Just slightly, but you're back.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to get this fixed on my end. I think we're having some restream problems, but I think that really the game planning is most important. Do you know what you're going to do in certain downs and situations? That to me is the biggest thing. And David Cutcliffe said this to me one time, and he said it on the air, and people freaked out. Like literally the phone lines and just like the message board would blow up now. People thought David Cutcliffe was crazy. And David Cutcliffe said that he believed that play calling is the most overrated aspect of being an offensive coordinator, because he said you should pretty much know, your quarterback should know what they want to call in that particular play. And back then, Tennessee ran a freeze play where Peyton Manning would come to the line and he would have a couple of different options. So I think it's overrated, number one. Now, Travis says you hired offensive coordinator, you hired defensive coordinator to let them call their game, override them as needed. Man, I tend to agree with Travis because you have the bird's eye view and you're not on the sideline. You can see secondary better. But I do think there are rare exceptions like Steve Spurrier and Josh Heupel that if they say, hey, dudes, I'm calling the play, then you defer to them. Would you agree or disagree with that, Caleb?
No, I would absolutely agree. And it depends on the situation. You're right. Play calling is a lot of times overrated now because of the offenses that are run. The problem with Jimbo Fisher, and this is the problem with Jimbo Fisher, and this is why
he said that without to be fair, David Cutcliffe said that way before nowadays. I mean, that was 15 years ago.
2013, I would say. But okay, Jimbo Fisher to me has the Cam Cameron mentality, which is I'm calling this specific play that will be run at this specific time, every single play, every single time. You have no right to change the play as a quarterback. I don't care what's happening. You call the play I called. Period. End of story. And there are no options or anything like that. And I think that's been an issue with Fisher. It was an issue with Cam Cameron back in the day. The year the Ravens won the Super Bowl was the year they fired Cam Cameron midseason, and they actually, Joe Flacco of all people, they let turn loose. So you're right. It is an overrated old school thing. Again, I'm with you. It's case by case. Now, one of the things we're not talking about, funny enough, is on the defensive side. I don't know if you know this, Dave, but Jeremy Pruitt was effectively the defensive coordinator at Tennessee his first year. He called all the plays. Derek Ansley called the plays the last 2 years, although I think Jeremy Pruitt's fingerprints are all over that. How do you think that works with somebody like Nick Saban? I feel like Kirby Smart was calling the plays, at least at the end, but I feel like since then, do you feel like Nick Saban has really been calling the plays on defense, or has he let his coordinators do the work?
You know, I wonder too, Caleb, how much better off is Tennessee and the rest of the SEC if Billy Napier is calling plays, to be real honest with you? And how much better off is the SEC, or worse off, if Bobby Petrino is handling those play calling duties? I think those are two very different situations, and one of which Tennessee will have to face and already has to face. If I'm Tennessee, facing A&M, I want Jimbo Fisher overriding Bobby Petrino because I think it creates some sort of internal issue. If I'm Tennessee playing Florida again, which I know can't happen, but I would want Billy Napier calling plays. Your thoughts on those two teams individually and the way their hierarchy is set up?
I exactly agree, but for the whole SEC as a whole, you prefer that situation to be that situation because that means Billy Napier is here but next year, and Bobby Petrino might get a head coaching job and leave after this year. And one of the things I want to bring up is we have experience with Billy Napier as an offensive coordinator. He was Clemson's offensive coordinator in 2010. Dabo Swinney almost lost his job that year and fired Billy Napier to save his job. And then Clemson took off after that, after Billy Napier was fired. So we have proof of Billy Napier as a bad play caller. And I don't think he's been that good of a play caller since he's been at Florida. You can talk about the Tennessee game. That was just a wild sequence of events that happened. So
okay, let me ask you this as it pertains to Tennessee. What do you think, and we can ask this, but what do you think is Josh Heupel's duties as far as play calling on game days? You think he's calling the plays? Do you think he's getting suggestions? I don't know that they have time for suggestions. I'm sure he has override capability. But what do you think are his duties? And maybe we'll ask about that at the press conference on Wednesday.
I think Josh Heupel probably, I don't know how this works with Heupel. My guess is Heupel does the game planning and mostly lets the offensive coordinator call the plays in the game. But I think Heupel does all the offensive game planning. I think that's Heupel's offense, and he does all the offensive game planning. And he lets the coordinator and the quarterback call the plays. And we've seen that because what people don't realize is offense is based on the court. Now, this is personnel based. Heupel's run pass percentages and his deep ball percentages and things like that on a yearly basis are not exactly the same. This offense is not the same offense that he ran at UCF when he went undefeated in 2018. It's a little bit different from that. So I think that has to do with Heupel's, again, it goes right to what you talked about. Play calling is overrated. Heupel's role is he does all the game planning for the offense during the week and I think he makes all the personnel decisions too for the offense.
You have, including the coordinator, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and the head coach. You have 5 coaches, right, that are involved in offensive game planning, right?
Let's see. And Joey Hawsley, Glenn Ellerby, Jerry Mack, Kelsey Pope, and Alec Ablin, and that doesn't include Josh Heupel. So
it'd be 5, right?
5 on-field offensive coaches, yeah.
Okay. To me, when you come to the line on a 2nd and 6, 90% of the time, everybody should be predicting the same play. Now, there are going to be occasions where you're going to run the Princeton Fant end around and things like that they did last year, but you should all be thinking of the same play each and every time. You should also be thinking about Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the fire opals? That's a Tennessee tradition. They're affordable. Go to rickterryjewelry.com. That's rickterryjewelry.com. I don't think that if you're Kelsey Pope, I'm just picking him out of left field, but if you're Kelsey Pope, I don't think that you should be surprised by any play call that happens during the game. Caleb, I think you should have a rough idea of what's going on based off what you've seen from the defense earlier and what you've game planned for all week. I don't think it should be a surprise whatsoever. That's why I go back to David Cutcliffe's comments. I think play calling is highly, highly overrated. There might be a handful of calls in the season that change the course of a game, but there's not a lot.
No. And I mean, also a lot of times I know there's certain offenses only have like 5 plays that they go to on a regular basis. That's pretty much it. I can tell you guys right now, you guys thought when you guys watched the Colts and the Broncos play all those Peyton Manning years where Peyton Manning looks so much smarter than the rest of the league. I watched a thing with Peyton Manning on it. You know, he only had like 4 or 5 plays in his arsenal the whole time. And all he was doing with all those changes at the line of scrimmage was he was trying to get the defense to bite on his audibles. 90% of those calls were dummy calls that they weren't going to change anything. His goal was to try to get the defense to bite. And so I think that's a lot of what football is now is the quarterback just reading the defense to a certain degree, and the play call is pretty simple at that point.
Do you remember the Omaha?
Yes.
I think sometimes that was same, and I think that was freeze, using from the Tennessee days, the freeze play where they would change it. So I think they went into some games where Omaha meant do the exact same thing we called, and at other times it meant to change it. So yeah, and as far as putting together a game plan, who would you take? Bobby Petrino, or would you take Jimbo Fisher? I know Jimbo Fisher has the national championship under his belt. I know that we think of Bobby Petrino as kind of a goofball because he shows up in a neck brace and he was on a motorcycle with a co-ed driving too fast. But as far as game planning, putting together an offense, I'll take Bobby Petrino any day over Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, I will too. Now, I thought the game had passed both of them by. I was wrong. It looks like Bobby Petrino has evolved finally. I think the game did pass him by, and I think he accepted it and changed afterward whenever he was, wherever he was, Idaho or wherever he was, maybe Missouri State. But I agree. I think Bobby Petrino, now I would take him over Jimbo Fisher. I think Fisher was really stuck in a certain way for a long time, like it was the mid-2000s. Look, I'm not here to knock Jimbo Fisher, the offensive coach. The 2001 SEC, anybody that questions him, go watch the 2001 SEC championship game. He changed on a fly from Rohan Davey to Matt Mock, and John Chavis was left completely confused on how to stop a running quarterback because that was not who they prepared for all week.